All right, the recording. Let me start again. Welcome to everyone that's here. Thank you for attending. For anyone that's new here, this is the Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes Working Group Forum. That's an area for anyone to discuss any topics they want to bring up regards to any projects in the Kubernetes space that are Cloud Foundry related. So I'm going to drop a link to a document in the chat, and people can look at that. If you have any other topics you'd like to add to it, drop them in chat. I can add them onto the document and we can go from there. So just give me one moment to pull those up. All right. So dropping that link in chat right now. Don't currently have any topics there, but I'll give it a couple minutes so we can think about that. I see a few more people are joining as well, so it'll be good to have a little bit of preamble time. All right, I don't see any topics popping up right now, but we can also run this as just a completely open forum if anyone has anything they'd like to discuss initially off the bat. Otherwise, we can just sort of like talk about what has been going on in the space.
Hey, Birdrock, I wanted to just get some understanding about some of the Kubernetes work with the cfcli. I saw a few updates on GitHub. I also saw some stuff on Slack pop up. So I'm not entirely sure what it is. So I'd really appreciate some understanding of what that actually is.
Sure. I can field that, or Tim, if you want to field it, that's fine too. Let me know.
I can take it if you want.
Yeah, but happy to take it.
Yeah, so basically, in terms of actual behavior, we do not expect changes on the CLI because we basically aim at implementing the same API as CF on VMs. So the CLI should just straight out work. The thing we deviated from the thing in which we deviated from CF on VMs is authentication, because we basically we are trying to get the cfcli to authenticate using Kubernetes native ways of authenticating instead of bringing in UAA and its way of authenticating, which means we had to change the CLI to teach it how to authenticate in a Kubernetes native way. And we achieved that by reusing code that comes from a library called ClientGo, which is the one the kubectl is based on. So basically, we've managed to get the cfcli to authenticate to Kubernetes by leveraging the user's kubeconfig, and which means if you have a cluster with any provider, that provider usually provides a way to generate a kubeconfig. They usually ship these like proprietary CLIs like Google does, Amazon does, Microsoft, etc. Once you've generated the kubeconfig with that tool, the cfcli will be able to just consume that config to talk to the cluster, which is basically we are leveraging Kubernetes authentication to authenticate against our API, which is pretty cool. Every operation that the API will be performed on behalf of the user, because the CLI will send over the authentication information that is needed by the API to then call the actual Kubernetes API. And yeah, but this means that basically any cluster you can authenticate to with kubectl, you'll be able to authenticate to with cfcli. So that was the change. It was not like, it was quite a few lines of code because we had to change quite a few bits. But in the end, the only change is in how we authenticate. Anything else is unchanged.
Thanks for that. So just to follow up to that, and I hope I'm not interrupting any other topics that folks have, but what does it mean in terms of behavior? And I'll give you an example. So I have a team of, let's say, 4 or 5 developers who are going to be interacting with the CF interface, right? So previously, they did not have to gain access to the Kubernetes clusters, because if they authenticated with the CF endpoint, that will automatically lead, that will automatically allow them to push apps to a Cloud Foundry foundation somewhere remote. Does that behavior change in any way? So does this mean that they'll require access to both the Kubernetes cluster as well as the Cloud Foundry endpoints, or what is that behavior like?
There is no distinction between Kubernetes users and Cloud Foundry users anymore. It's just the same user base. And in the same spirit, we at some point want people to be able to consume CF both via the API shim, that the thing we've been concentrating on lately, or via our custom resource definitions. So that distinction is just not in place anymore. So previously, I guess with CF for K8s, you had UAA running. So you had a user base that was inside UAA's database. And so you could add someone to the UAA use base, and people would be able to use CF via those users. And then CF for K8s via Irini created containers on Kubernetes with its own privileged user. Now what's happening is that operations are being performed as your Kubernetes user. So you log in to your Kubernetes cluster as a Kubernetes user, and then the CLI will communicate your credentials to the API, which will use them to act on your behalf on the cluster. There's exceptions to this. There is operations that just can't be performed on behalf of the user, like just by using the user's credentials. So there are things where like we fill in the gaps. There are places where like we have to fill in the gaps with some privileged credentials. But overall, most operations will just happen on behalf of the user using the user's credentials that get sent over by the CLI. So we kind of removed that layer altogether. The authorization, most of the authorization will also happen basically via Kubernetes' role-based access control. So we aim to recreate the same permissions that CF has for different roles via roles and role bindings on Kubernetes. So that basically consuming CF via the API or the CRDs should be pretty much the same, even in terms of permissions. If the concern is that you want to like constrain your users to only be able to do CF things and not do anything else on the cluster, then you have to, I guess, do that via the Kubernetes tools. So restrict access to only the namespaces created by the Cloud Foundry. This is slightly tricky because Cloud Foundry will create namespaces dynamically when you, for example, as an admin, create spaces and create orgs. But in the end, just by creating the user and then as an admin creating spaces and orgs and adding roles, just like you did on Cloud Foundry on VMs, the things should just work out, and your users should not have any permission on the rest of the Kubernetes clusters, because those roles will be set up to only give permissions to the user on the namespaces created and managed by Cloud Foundry. So you should be fine.
Got it. Yeah, thanks so much for clarifying, Jesse.
Awesome. That was great. For the people that are just joining us or that are listening to this discussion and may not know the context, this discussion was centered around the K8s controllers repo, and I can drop a link into that, which is a project that's ongoing to sort of re-envision the CF experience on top of Kubernetes. So giving that nice sort of CF push flow, but without the underpinnings of the previous Cloud Foundry. So that's, if you haven't seen it, check it out. Work's ongoing. It's still pretty new, so not by no means feature complete, but we're making a lot of progress and it's shaping up to be pretty cool. So just to contextualize that, that is what that is about. Cool. All right. Any other, well, we can discuss that more if you want, or if there are any other topics anyone would like to bring up at the moment. As always, we can use as much or as little of the time as we want. So understandably, if people are coming off of the shuffle from the holidays and all that, we might not have a lot to discuss at the moment. Cool. Sounds like it's a little quiet for the moment. So last chance to interject something before I wrap it up and say we'll see you in 2 weeks. Okay, cool. So thank you for the first time attendees. Please come back. Hopefully it's been worth your time. And feel free to reach out and send any questions to myself or some of the other people via Slack, via direct message, or the K8s Dev Slack channel in the Cloud Foundry Slack. We'd love to hear from people, make sure we're addressing the concerns that people have moving forward on all of this, and would really like to just have more people to talk about to make sure everything is serving the needs. So again, once again, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you in about 2 weeks at the next meeting, and we'll keep on moving. So happy holidays, everyone.